They were born from fire, fear, and forbidden acts. Two cursed bloodlines that emerged not from love or war, but from a night of desperation in a cave where morality was buried alongside the ashes of Sodom and Gomorrah. The Moabites and the Ammonites, names that echo through scripture like a warning bell, were the descendants of Lot's own daughters, born through an unholy union meant to preserve a lineage at any cost. But the cost was far greater than they could imagine. These weren't just distant tribes skirmishing at Israel's borders. These were living reminders of sin, shame, and divine wrath. Their very existence stood as a defiant challenge to God's order. And for generations, they would become thorns in the side of God's chosen people. They built altars to false gods. They seduced Israel into spiritual adultery. They mocked, attacked, and betrayed again and again until judgment fell like a hammer from heaven. In this video, we're peeling back the veil on one of the Bible's most scandalous origin stories, uncovering the forbidden beginnings, the cultural corruption, and the spiritual consequences that made Moab and Ammon synonymous with rebellion. But this is not just ancient history. Their story speaks to our world today. What happens when humanity crosses lines it was never meant to, and how even in the shadow of judgment, a glimmer of redemption remains. So stay with us, because once you understand who the Moabites and Ammonites truly were, you'll never read the Bible the same way again. This is the tale of the most cursed peoples in the Bible. The origins of the Moabites and Ammonites are steeped in a shocking narrative found in the book of Genesis, specifically the story of Lot and his daughters. After the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot and his daughters found themselves in a desolate cave, believing they were the last survivors of humanity. In a desperate attempt to preserve their family line, Lot's daughters devised a plan to intoxicate their father and engage in incestuous relations with him. This resulted in the birth of two sons, Moab and Ben-Ami. The name Moab translates to "from my father," while Ben-Ami means "son of my people." These names carry heavy moral implications as they reflect the circumstances of their conception and the troubling choices made by Lot's daughters. The very act of their birth is marked by a profound moral failure, highlighting the lengths to which they went to ensure their lineage, even at the cost of familial integrity. This incestuous beginning serves as a grim foundation for both nations, marking them as spiritually corrupted from birth. The Moabites and Ammonites would go on to embody the consequences of their origins, often engaging in practices that were abhorrent to the Israelites and contrary to God's commandments. Their lineage is a stark reminder of how sin can perpetuate through generations, influencing the moral fabric of a people. As we reflect on this narrative, it becomes evident that the origins of the Moabites and Ammonites are not just historical footnotes, but serve as cautionary tales about the dangers of straying from divine principles. Their story invites us to consider the implications of our choices and the legacy we leave behind, emphasizing the importance of adhering to moral standards in our own lives. In examining the complex relationship between God and the Moabites and Ammonites, we turn to the scriptures, particularly Deuteronomy 2:9 and 2:19, where God explicitly commands Moses regarding these nations. In Deuteronomy 2:9, God instructs Moses not to harass the Moabites, stating, "Do not harass the Moabites or provoke them to war, for I will not give you any of their land." Similarly, in verse 19, God tells Moses to pass through the territory of the Ammonites, indicating that he has given them their land as well. This divine directive highlights God's sovereignty in determining the boundaries and inheritances of nations, regardless of their scandalous origins. The significance of God's decision to allow the Moabites and Ammonites to inherit land lies in the broader narrative of his plan for humanity. Despite their morally questionable beginnings, God chose to grant them a place in the world, demonstrating that his grace can extend even to those who may seem undeserving. This act of sovereignty underscores the idea that God's purposes often transcend human understanding and judgment. However, it is crucial to note that their inheritance was not unconditional. The land granted to the Moabites and Ammonites was temporary and contingent upon their actions and relationship with Israel. This conditional aspect of their inheritance serves as a reminder of the importance of obedience to God's commands. The Moabites and Ammonites were given a chance to exist peacefully, but their continued rebellion against God and his people would ultimately lead to their downfall. Thus, their story illustrates the delicate balance between divine grace and the necessity of accountability, emphasizing that while God may grant opportunities, the choices made in response to his sovereignty carry significant consequences. The narrative of Balaam provides a fascinating glimpse into the spiritual conflict between Israel and the Moabites and Ammonites, illustrating the complexities of divine intervention and human ambition. Balaam, a prophet known for his ability to bless or curse, was summoned by King Balak of Moab to curse the Israelites as they approached the Promised Land. Balak feared the growing strength of Israel and believed that a curse from Balaam would weaken them. However, God intervened, warning Balaam not to curse his people, as they were blessed. Despite this divine warning, Balaam's spiritual blindness led him to pursue the king's offer, revealing his inner conflict between greed and obedience to God. As Balaam attempted to curse Israel, he found himself unable to speak anything but blessings. Each time he opened his mouth to pronounce a curse, God transformed his words into declarations of Israel's strength and favor. This phenomenon highlights the significance of God's sovereignty over the spiritual realm, demonstrating that no curse can prevail against those whom God has chosen. Balaam's blessings, though intended to be curses, serve as a powerful reminder of God's protection over Israel and his ultimate authority in spiritual matters. The ongoing spiritual battle between Israel and the Moabites and Ammonites is underscored by Balaam's actions and the subsequent events that unfolded. Despite the blessings pronounced by Balaam, the Moabites and Ammonites continued to engage in practices that led them away from God, ultimately resulting in their downfall. This conflict illustrates the broader theme of spiritual warfare present throughout the biblical narrative, where the forces of good and evil are constantly at odds. The story of Balaam serves as a poignant reminder of the consequences of spiritual blindness and the importance of aligning oneself with God's will, as the struggle between Israel and these nations reflects the eternal battle for faithfulness and obedience to God. The Moabites employed a cunning strategy to seduce the Israelites into idolatry and immorality, leveraging their vulnerability to corrupt their faith and practices. This tactic involved using Moabite women to entice the Israelite men, leading them into relationships that would ultimately draw them away from their covenant with God. The allure of these women was not merely romantic. It was deeply intertwined with the pagan rituals and worship practices of the Moabite culture, which included the worship of Baal, a fertility deity. By engaging in these relationships, the Israelites were not only violating their own moral and religious codes, but were also participating in the idolatrous practices that accompanied these unions. The consequences of Israel's participation in these pagan rituals were severe and far-reaching. As the Israelites began to worship Baal and engage in immoral acts, they turned their backs on the God who had delivered them from Egypt and provided for them in the wilderness. This spiritual infidelity provoked God's anger, leading to immediate and devastating judgment. The incident at Peor, where the Israelites fell into idolatry and immorality, serves as a critical turning point in their journey. In response to their unfaithfulness, God commanded Moses to take decisive action against the leaders of this rebellion, resulting in a plague that claimed the lives of 24,000 Israelites. The significance of the Baal Peor incident lies in its stark reminder of the dangers of compromise and the consequences of turning away from God. It illustrates how easily a community can be led astray when it allows external influences to infiltrate its values and beliefs. This episode serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of remaining vigilant in faith and the need for steadfastness in the face of temptation, emphasizing that the pursuit of holiness is essential for maintaining a right relationship with God. God's decree of eternal rejection for the Moabites and Ammonites is a significant theme in the biblical narrative, particularly highlighted in Deuteronomy 23:3, which states that no Ammonite or Moabite may enter the assembly of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. This exclusion from the congregation underscores the severity of their actions and the consequences of their persistent rebellion against God and His people. The reasons for their rejection are deeply rooted in their historical antagonism towards Israel, particularly during critical moments of Israel's journey to the Promised Land. The Moabites and Ammonites not only sought to undermine Israel through deceitful means, such as the seduction of Israelite men into idolatry and immorality, but they also actively opposed Israel during their exodus from Egypt. Instead of offering assistance or hospitality, they chose to wage war against God's chosen people. This hostility and refusal to acknowledge God's sovereignty over Israel marked them as adversaries, leading to their ultimate exclusion from the community of believers. The spiritual implications of their persistent rebellion are profound. Their actions reflect a broader theme of disobedience and defiance against God's commands, which ultimately results in a severed relationship with Him. The Moabites and Ammonites serve as cautionary examples of how turning away from God and engaging in practices contrary to His will can lead to irrevocable consequences. Their rejection from the assembly signifies not only a physical separation from the people of God, but also a spiritual estrangement from His grace and mercy. This decree serves as a reminder of the importance of faithfulness and obedience in the life of a believer. The Moabites and Ammonites illustrate the dangers of rebellion against God, emphasizing that persistent disobedience can lead to a state of eternal rejection, highlighting the necessity of aligning one's life with God's purposes to avoid such dire consequences. The historical conflicts between Israel and the Moabites and Ammonites are marked by a series of significant events that illustrate the ongoing animosity and strife between these nations. One of the earliest instances of oppression occurred during the period of the Judges, when the Moabites, under King Eglon, subjugated Israel for 18 years. This oppression was characterized by harsh treatment and tribute demands, leading to widespread suffering among the Israelites. It was not until the rise of Ehud, a left-handed judge, that Israel was delivered from Moabite control. Ehud's cunning assassination of Eglon and subsequent victory over the Moabites marked a pivotal moment in Israel's struggle for freedom, showcasing God's deliverance in times of dire need. The contempt shown by the Ammonites towards Israel continued into the monarchy, particularly during the reign of King David. The Ammonites, led by their king Hanun, insulted David's envoys which escalated into a conflict. This act of disrespect not only demonstrated their disdain for Israel, but also ignited a war that resulted in significant military engagements. David's forces ultimately triumphed, further solidifying Israel's dominance in the region and showcasing the consequences of the Ammonites' contempt. Another critical moment in the history of Israel's conflicts with these nations occurred during the reign of King Jehoshaphat of Judah. The Moabites and Ammonites formed a coalition to wage war against Judah, presenting a formidable threat. However, God's intervention was evident, as he instructed Jehoshaphat to seek his guidance. In a remarkable turn of events, God caused confusion among the enemy forces, leading them to turn on one another. This divine intervention not only saved Judah, but also highlighted God's sovereignty and protection over his people. These historical conflicts serve as a testament to the enduring struggle between Israel and the Moabites and Ammonites, illustrating the consequences of rebellion against God and the ultimate triumph of his purposes in the face of opposition. The idolatrous practices of the Moabites and Ammonites are deeply rooted in their worship of deities such as Chemosh and Moloch, which were central to their religious and cultural identities. Chemosh, the god of Moab, was often associated with war and fertility, and his worship involved various rituals that included offerings and sacrifices. The Ammonites, on the other hand, revered Moloch, a deity infamous for the horrific practice of child sacrifice. Worshippers would offer their children as burnt sacrifices, believing that such acts would secure favor, prosperity, and protection from their gods. These practices were not only shocking, but also indicative of a broader cultural normalization of violence and immorality in their religious observances. The normalization of human sacrifice among the Moabites and Ammonites reflects a profound moral decay, as these societies prioritized appeasing their gods over the sanctity of human life. This gruesome practice was often justified as a means to ensure agricultural fertility or military success, illustrating how deeply ingrained idolatry can corrupt ethical standards and lead to heinous acts. The willingness to sacrifice their own children reveals a chilling commitment to their beliefs, showcasing the extent to which idolatry can distort human values. The spiritual ramifications of such idolatry on Israel were significant and far-reaching. The allure of these practices posed a constant threat to the Israelites, who were often tempted to adopt the customs of their neighboring nations. This syncretism led to a weakening of their covenant relationship with God, as they strayed from his commandments and engaged in practices that were abhorrent to him. The consequences of this idolatry were dire, resulting in divine judgment and a loss of God's protection over Israel. The stories of the Moabites and Ammonites serve as cautionary tales, emphasizing the dangers of turning away from true worship and the devastating impact of idolatry on a community's spiritual health and moral integrity. The prophetic declarations of judgment against the Moabites and Ammonites are vividly articulated in the writings of key prophets, such as Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. These texts reveal a consistent theme of divine condemnation directed at these nations for their persistent idolatry, immorality, and hostility towards Israel. In Isaiah 15-16, the prophet delivers a poignant message of impending doom for Moab, describing the devastation that will come upon the land and its people. The imagery of desolation and mourning underscores the severity of God's judgment, as Moab is portrayed as a nation facing inevitable destruction due to its rebellion against God. Similarly, Jeremiah's prophecies in chapters 48 and 49 detail the impending calamity for Moab and Ammon. Jeremiah proclaims that Moab will be laid waste, emphasizing that their pride and arrogance will lead to their downfall. The lack of restoration promises in these prophetic texts is striking. Unlike other nations that receive a glimmer of hope for future redemption, the Moabites and Ammonites are met with a stark declaration of judgment without the assurance of restoration. This absence of hope highlights the severity of their condemnation and the finality of God's decision regarding their fate. Ezekiel also contributes to this narrative in chapters 25 and 35, where he pronounces judgment against both nations, emphasizing their role in opposing Israel and their participation in acts of violence. The prophetic declarations serve as a sobering reminder of the consequences of rebellion against God and the permanence of their condemnation. The severity of these judgments reflects not only God's justice, but also his unwavering commitment to uphold his covenant with Israel. The Moabites and Ammonites stand as examples of nations that, despite their opportunities for repentance, chose to persist in their ways, ultimately sealing their fate in the annals of biblical history. The enigmatic details surrounding Moab and Ammon in eschatological contexts are intriguing, particularly as they appear in the prophetic visions of Daniel. In Daniel 11, the text alludes to various nations and their roles in the unfolding of end-time events, with Moab and Ammon mentioned in the context of a broader geopolitical landscape. These references suggest that, despite their historical enmity towards Israel and their previous judgments, these nations will have a part to play in the final days. Their inclusion in Daniel's visions raises questions about their significance in the eschatological narrative and the nature of God's plans for all nations. One notable aspect of the prophetic texts is the implication that Moab and Ammon may experience a temporary escape from judgment. This notion is particularly compelling given their historical condemnation and the absence of restoration promises in earlier prophetic declarations. The idea that these nations could find a reprieve in the eschatological timeline suggests a complex interplay between divine justice and mercy, indicating that God's plans may extend beyond immediate judgment to encompass a broader redemptive purpose for all peoples. The theological significance of Moab and Ammon's role in the final events cannot be understated. Their presence in eschatological discussions serves as a reminder of God's sovereignty over all nations, emphasizing that even those historically viewed as adversaries can be part of his divine plan. This inclusion highlights the overarching theme of redemption and the possibility of transformation, suggesting that God's grace can extend even to those who have long been in opposition to him. Ultimately, the enigmatic details regarding Moab and Ammon in eschatological contexts invite deeper reflection on the nature of God's justice, mercy, and the unfolding of his redemptive history, reminding believers that no one is beyond the reach of his sovereign will. In this video, we have explored the complex and often troubling narratives surrounding the Moabites and Ammonites, emphasizing the significance of their origins and the resulting judgment from God. We began by examining their scandalous beginnings, rooted in the incestuous actions of Lot and his daughters, which set the stage for their tumultuous relationship with Israel. This foundation of moral failure led to God's decree of eternal rejection, as outlined in Deuteronomy 23:3, highlighting the consequences of their persistent rebellion against him. We also discussed the idolatrous practices of these nations, particularly their worship of Chemosh and Moloch, which included horrific acts such as child sacrifice. These practices not only reflected a deep moral corruption, but also posed a significant spiritual threat to Israel, leading to divine judgment and the loss of God's protection. The prophetic declarations from figures like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel further underscored the severity of their condemnation, with no promises of restoration, serving as a stark reminder of the consequences of turning away from God. As we reflect on these narratives, it is essential to consider the spiritual lessons they impart. The stories of Moab and Ammon remind us of the dangers of idolatry, the importance of remaining faithful to God, and the consequences of our choices. They challenge us to examine our own lives and ensure that we are aligned with God's will. If you found this exploration insightful, we encourage you to subscribe to our channel for more content that delves into biblical history and theology. Don't forget to like this video and share it with others who may benefit from these discussions. Join us as we continue to uncover the rich tapestry of Scripture and its relevance to our lives today. Thank you for watching.